Ever read a book or watched a movie, and there's that one character, the one who's just so obsessed with appearances?
Absolutely.
It's like they're wearing a mask, and you just can't help but wonder what's hiding underneath.
Right. You're like, what's their deal?
Exactly. And today, we're diving deep into that very idea with a character who practically invented smoke and mirrors, Gilderoy Lockhart, everyone's favorite hero from Harry Potter.
Lockhart. A fascinating character to unpack, that's for sure.
To do that, we're using the Enneagram, which you know is a personality typing system. We're going to be looking specifically at type 3, the achiever, to really get into what makes Lockhart, well, Lockhart.
The Enneagram is such a useful tool for this kind of deep dive because it gives us this framework to understand the why behind people's actions, even fictional ones.
Right, it's not just about slapping a label on them.
Exactly. It's about getting a deeper understanding of their motivations, their fears, their desires, all that good stuff. And it can be surprisingly insightful.
Totally. And for this deep dive, we're drawing insights from this YouTube video essay that breaks down Lockhart's every move through this Enneagram type 3 lens. It is really fascinating stuff.
I'm intrigued already.
Right off the bat, the video calls Lockhart a textbook type 3. They make a really compelling case, pointing out how his need for recognition is almost like an obsession.
It's more than just wanting a pat on the back. It's like his whole sense of self-worth is riding on it.
Yes, it's like his identity hinges on those flashy book covers and all those supposed triumphs over dark creatures. And speaking of needing to be the center of attention, remember how he finagled his way into that Hogwarts teaching position?
Oh, how could we forget? Talk about a grand entrance.
He practically tripped over his own ego trying to soak up all the spotlight, right? The video does a great job of showing how everything about Lockhart, from his perfectly styled hair to that dazzling smile, it's all meticulously crafted to project this image of success.
Oh, for sure. And that careful crafting of a persona that's very three-ish. It's not always coming from a place of wanting to deceive, though. For a lot of threes, it's deeply rooted in this need for validation, this desire to feel worthy and accomplished.
Yeah, it's almost like they're seeking that feeling of worth through how others see them and their achievements rather than looking inward.
Absolutely. Like, think about that friend who's constantly posting about their accomplishments on social media. They might have a strong 3 influence. Not that there's anything wrong with a little self-promotion now and then, of course.
Of course, we all do it to some extent. But it's fascinating how this video really digs into that need for validation and how it fuels so much of what Lockhart does.
Definitely. It's like that need is driving them, pushing them to achieve more, be seen as more.
And this video goes beyond just surface level observations, like it doesn't just point out the obvious about Lockhart. It delves into some of the potential pitfalls of being so focused on external validation. Take, for example, his habit of, let's say, borrowing other people's accomplishments.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He was quite the expert at conveniently forgetting to mention where he got the inspiration for those amazing feats of his.
Right. The video points out how he exaggerates, steals credit, and basically builds this whole persona on a foundation of, well, let's just say embellishments.
And that's where the three's fear of failure can really come into play.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it's like this. The need to maintain that image of success, of always being on top, of never being seen as anything less than extraordinary, it can become so all-consuming.
Wow. I hadn't thought about it like that before.
It can drive them to go to great lengths to protect that image, even if it means bending the truth a little. Or a lot, in Lockhart's case.
It really makes you wonder, how much of his own hype did Lockhart actually buy into?
Right. Like, was he consciously aware of the deception? Or did he really believe deep down that he was this amazing wizard?
Yeah, exactly. Had he completely internalized this totally inflated image of himself?
That's such an interesting question, and it actually connects to this really fascinating aspect of the Enneagram 3 that the video talks about.
Self-deception.
Self-deception. Yeah. So it's this idea that some threes, they're not just fooling other people, they're actually fooling themselves too.
Whoa, that's deep.
Right. It's not just about projecting this image outward, it's about truly believing in this, idealized version of themselves, even if it's built on, not exactly a solid foundation of truth.
So it's less about conscious deception and more about genuinely believing in this, manufactured reality.
Exactly. And the video actually argues that J.K. Rowling, maybe without even realizing it, created this almost like a parody of this tendency with Lockhart.
A parody?
Yeah, she was kind of poking fun at how some threes can get so attached to their carefully constructed personas that they lose sight of who they really are underneath it all.
It's almost like they've forgotten how to be their authentic selves.
It is, isn't it?
Mhm.
And the consequences of that can be, well, pretty significant.
Yeah, no kidding. And speaking of consequences, let's talk about that memory charm backfiring on Lockhart. It's almost too perfect, right? Like the guy who built his entire career on stolen memories ends up with amnesia, wiping away all those fabricated experiences.
It's almost like poetic justice, in a way.
Right. But do you think Rowling was hinting at something deeper there?
The video seems to think so.
Yeah.
They suggest it's like this powerful metaphor for what happens when threes are forced to confront their true selves, stripped of all those achievements and accolades they've used to define themselves.
It's like their worst fear coming true being exposed as, ordinary.
Yeah, and having to face that fear without the crutch of their carefully constructed persona.
That's got to be terrifying, to have your entire identity, everything you thought you were, suddenly ripped away.
It would be incredibly disorienting, to say the least. And I think it's part of what makes Lockhart's story, even though it's played for laughs, also kind of sad.
Yeah, there's definitely a tragic element to it, this deep fear of failure driving him to such extreme lengths of self-deception.
Absolutely. And that's where understanding the Enneagram can be so valuable, I think. It's not about labeling people or putting them in these rigid boxes.
Right. It's more about understanding those patterns, those motivations and fears that drive our behavior.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those tendencies, both in ourselves and in others, and having compassion for, well, for the reasons behind those behaviors. It's like we were saying earlier, holding up a mirror. And sometimes what we see in that reflection can be, well, a little unsettling.
Especially when it comes to those carefully crafted personas we present to the world.
Exactly. And, the video also talks about how this constant need for external validation, it can actually lead to a sense of isolation, even when you're surrounded by people who seem to admire you.
It's like the more you chase after validation from others, the further you move away from genuine connection.
It's a real paradox, isn't it? And I think
Oh.
Lockhart's story, it illustrates that paradox in a way that's, well, both humorous and kind of heartbreaking.
It's kind of like chasing that external validation can actually make you feel more alone, even when you're surrounded by people who, at least on the surface, seem to think you're amazing.
Yeah, it's strange how that works, right? And Lockhart, as over the top as he is, kind of embodies that in this, well, thought-provoking way. Like the video says, that real, genuine fulfillment, the kind that can handle all the ups and downs life throws at you, it comes from accepting yourself, even the messy bits.
Totally. It's about knowing deep down that your worth isn't tied to, like, awards or achievements or whatever, no matter how impressive they might seem to everyone else.
Exactly. And I think that's a message that goes way beyond just this Harry Potter character, or even just books in general.
Oh, for sure.
Like, we all deal with that pressure, right? Especially these days, where it seems like everyone's always comparing themselves to everyone else.
It's like we're all living under this giant social media filter or something, always showing off the perfect version of ourselves, but never the real behind-the-scenes stuff.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Which is why I think being self-aware is so important, like really taking a step back to look at those patterns in our own lives.
Right. Like recognizing those moments when we're maybe slipping into Lockhart mode.
Exactly. It's like, hold on a second, am I doing this for the right reasons?
Yeah.
And then gently, steering yourself back to a place of being genuine.
Love that. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into Gilderoy Lockhart and the Enneagram Type 3, let me leave you with this. What if, instead of chasing after some perfect image of ourselves, we just embrace the fact that we're all a little messy and complicated?
What if we tried seeing our flaws not as something to hide, but as part of what makes us unique?
Right. And maybe, just maybe, we'd find that being vulnerable, being real, is actually way more rewarding than trying to be some flawless, untouchable version of ourselves.
Now, wouldn't that be something? Food for thought.